The unseen shield, why your frequency triggers fear in entities that feed on control. There's something no one told you when you began your spiritual path. Some of us weren't meant to fight darkness. We were meant to radiate in such a way that darkness avoids us entirely. That's not arrogance, it's energetic law. When you carry a rare frequency, especially the kind that comes through lifetimes of shadow integration, dark forces don't want to play with you. They want to avoid you. Not because they can't reach you, but because your field disassembles their architecture. You don't just shine light, you recode the room. And this is the first sign that you may be walking as a dark chosen one. The attacks don't come as often anymore. You don't waste energy fighting invisible battles. You've become the kind of presence that makes distortion feel like it's suffocating. And so it leaves.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lessons.
You may have noticed that people with heavy spiritual attachments simply don't linger around you. They avoid eye contact. They get uncomfortable. They may even try to provoke you, only to back off suddenly. That's not personal. That's your field doing its work. When you've transmuted enough density within yourself, your aura becomes a mirror. A violent one. It reflects people's parasites, their dishonesty, their fragmentation. You don't even have to say a word. Your silence becomes an exorcism. That's why some dark entities don't even try to enter your space. They know what happens when they do. They get burned, not by your ego, not by your rituals, but by the raw coherence of your soul. In that coherence is rare, it's ancient, it's earned, and it's terrifying to energies that feed on chaos. Another sign is that your dreams shift. You stop having nightmares that feel external. You stop being chased by dark figures. You stop waking up in fear. Instead, the dream realm becomes a place where you are the sovereign figure. You give commands. You close portals. You walk through temples and tunnels with full authority. This isn't fantasy. It's a sign that your subconscious no longer sees darkness as a threat. It sees it as a force to be respected, but not feared. And in the astral, that shift is everything. When you're no longer broadcasting fear, you're no longer edible. You stop being food for entities that require your emotional fragmentation to survive. You become the hunter, not the hunted. And in that space, your very presence becomes a spiritual firewall. You also experience a strange kind of loneliness. Not because you're unloved, but because your frequency filters everything. People can't lie around you. They can't wear masks. They can't pretend to be what they're not. And so many choose to leave. This is not rejection. This is resonance doing its job. Your energy isn't just rare, it's refining. It strips away illusion. It calls people into accountability without speaking. And for many, that's unbearable. But for those who are ready, you become a catalyst. You activate awakenings just by existing. Not because you're trying to, but because your field reminds them of who they are beneath the noise. And that impact is sacred. That's why dark forces don't want to be near you. Because your existence undoes their work. You've probably noticed that when you enter sacred spaces, temples, ancient sites, sacred forests, the energy doesn't test you. It greets you. There's no resistance, no initiation. You're not asked to prove yourself. You're remembered, recognized, welcomed. The land knows who you are. The elements know your name. Why? Because your frequency matches the original codes. You didn't just awaken in this life, you've done the work across timelines. And those timelines are encoded in your aura. That's why dark forces hesitate. They don't see a person. They see a multi-dimensional being with contracts they can't override. You didn't just protect yourself. You became a living contract of divine law. And that contract makes you untouchable to unclean spirits. But here's the final sign, and it's the most subtle. You don't crave protection anymore. You're not obsessed with shielding, cleansing, or defending. Not because you're careless, but because you've transcended the frequency of fear. You understand that the most powerful force isn't light, it's clarity. And your clarity has become your armor. You don't repel darkness out of resistance. You repel it because you no longer house it unconsciously. That's the true power of the dark chosen one. You move through the world with a soft gaze and a sharp aura. You speak softly, but your words land like lightning. You don't chase safety, you carry it within. And that's why dark forces avoid you. Because they can't enter a field that no longer leaks. The frequency of no entry, why you've become spiritually uninhabitable to lower forces. We often romanticize spiritual power as something visible: light beams, psychic visions, ancient symbols glowing in the dark. But the deepest spiritual power is invisible. It's quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't posture. It simply is. And that's the first truth we must come to terms with as dark chosen ones. The more refined your energy becomes, the less performative it gets. You don't need to prove your power. You embody it. And that embodiment creates something rare, a frequency that says, no entry. Not through words, not through rituals, but through resonance. This field can't be faked. It can't be taught in a weekend course. It's forged in silence, in collapse, in rebirth. And once it's alive in you, dark forces don't just avoid you, they can't find access to you anymore. This is why, as your frequency matures, your life becomes simpler but more precise. You're no longer interested in spiritual theatrics. You're not chasing gurus or begging for signs. You're not obsessed with knowing what every number means or decoding every shadow on your wall. Why? Because you've realized the real work was internal alchemy, not external symbolism. And that internal alchemy has solidified your field in a way that makes you spiritually expensive. Meaning, you're too costly to interfere with. Entities that operate on confusion, illusion, or fear know the cost of engaging with a being who has become whole. When your shadow is integrated, when your light is not for show but for structure, when your soul is seated firmly in your body, there is no portal left for them to enter. You might also notice that you no longer flinch at darkness. Not because you're numb, but because you're clear. Fear no longer has a place to root inside you. You meet darkness with neutrality. You don't glamorize it, and you don't demonize it. You understand it. You've walked through it. And that understanding creates a frequency of energetic authority. Think about it. Predators don't attack what they can't predict. They don't approach what doesn't react. And this is exactly what your rare energy emits, a field of presence so grounded that it doesn't collapse under pressure. It doesn't flinch when provoked. It doesn't chase or run. It simply holds. And that holding, that stillness, becomes a weapon in itself. Not a weapon to harm, but one that neutralizes chaos on contact. Another sign that dark forces avoid you is that you've become spiritually boring to them. And that's a compliment. You're no longer emotionally volatile. You're not leaking energy through toxic loops, addictive cycles, or unconscious trauma patterns. You're not sending out vibrational signals that say, "I doubt myself, come test me." Instead, your field is clean, not sterile, not perfect, but honest. And honesty is kryptonite to manipulation. Demonic forces don't care about your morality. They care about your fragmentation. They care about your inner contradictions. And when you've reconciled those contradictions, when you've made peace with both your divinity and your damage, you become spiritually uninhabitable to anything that requires division to survive. You've probably had people call you intense without knowing why. Or they say, "I feel like I can't lie around you." That's not ego, it's energetic precision. Your very presence holds a frequency that pierces through illusion. You don't need to do anything. You are the frequency. And that's why dark forces don't want you near their hosts. Because your presence makes it uncomfortable for them to stay. You activate dormant codes in others just by being in the room. You awaken memories they've been trying to forget. You collapse false timelines without raising your voice. And that's not power in the cinematic sense. That's power in the cosmic sense, the kind that alters fields without force. The kind that erases agreements that were made in confusion just by clarity walking into the conversation. So now I'll ask you something that few dare to ask themselves. If you stopped explaining your energy and just let it be, what would you become? What would shift in your life if you no longer filtered your presence to make others comfortable? If you no longer dimmed your knowing to stay relatable? If you no longer played small to avoid being feared? Because make no mistake, some will fear you. But that fear is not about you. It's about the parts of them that feel exposed in your light. And that's okay. Not everyone can meet your frequency. But the ones who can, they will rise because of you. And the ones who can't, they will exit. And both are forms of divine order. Your job is not to be liked. Your job is to be a living vibration of what clarity feels like in a confused world. That's what makes you untouchable. That's what makes you rare. The silence that commands, why your aura speaks louder than any exorcism. There's a moment in spiritual evolution where you realize you don't need to cast out demons because your aura already told them not to come. This is the level where true dark chosen ones live. It's the realm of energetic command, not fear-based defense. You don't need to light a candle in every corner or sleep with crystals under your pillow. Not because those things aren't valid tools, but because your being has become the tool. Your vibration is the flame. Your presence is the invocation. This is a sign that dark forces avoid you. You don't chase safety because you became the safety. You don't beg for protection because you embody the law. And the law is simple. That which is whole cannot be owned. That which is integrated cannot be infiltrated. That which is true cannot be manipulated. This is why your silence has become louder than any chant. You've entered the phase where you no longer need to explain your boundaries. They're felt. You don't need to tell someone they're out of alignment. Your presence reflects it back to them. You don't need to raise your voice. Your stillness does the work. And that stillness is not passivity. It's density. It's the gravity of someone who has faced their own shadow and chosen to remain. You no longer react to projections. You no longer defend your truth. You simply are. And in that being, dark forces feel something they cannot metabolize, clarity without compromise. That's what burns them. Not your anger, not your rituals, but the non-negotiable nature of your vibration. You've probably noticed how people react strangely to you in public. Some are drawn to you instantly without understanding why. Others avoid you without explanation. Some look at you like they remember you from another lifetime. And maybe they do. Because when your field reaches this level of refinement, you become a living archive. You carry codes that the soul remembers even when the mind doesn't. You become a walking memory of something ancient, something sacred, something that once walked the earth but was buried by time. And that remembrance triggers everything, both light and dark. Entities that feed on confusion recognize that your presence brings inevitable collapse. Not because you're attacking, but because your coherence undoes their agreements from the inside out. This is also why you're no longer easily manipulated by spiritual people. You can feel when someone is cloaked in light, but hiding rot. You can sense when someone's love and light persona is really a mask for control. You don't need to call them out. You don't need to argue. You simply exit. Because your soul knows that exposure is not your job, discernment is. And this discernment is another reason dark forces avoid you. They know they can't trick you with false light. They can't bait you into spiritual ego loops. They can't seduce you with power, status, or mystical illusions. Because you've already died the deaths. You've already faced the void. You've already realized that true power is not found in how much you know, but in how little you need to prove. Another deep sign that dark entities avoid you is this: you no longer identify with the wound. You see it, you honor it, but you don't become it. You used to say, "I am broken, I am lost, I am in pain." Now you say, "I am the one witnessing those parts." That space between experience and identity is what makes you uninhabitable. Because possession requires identification. A dark force can't stay in a vessel that doesn't believe the lie. And you've stopped believing. You've stopped collapsing into labels. You've stopped making pain your personality. That doesn't mean you don't feel it. It means you don't feed it. And that starving of distortion is what creates spiritual immunity. You're not avoiding shadow, you're no longer owned by it. And that is what makes you rare. So now I'll ask you, if your energy could speak, what would it say to the unseen world? Not from ego, from truth. Would it whisper, "I hope you don't see me"? Or would it say, "I am here and I remember who I am"? Would it tremble in fear when distortion enters the room, or would it expand to meet it with compassion and clarity? Because if you've reached the level I'm talking about, your field already answers that question. It speaks before you do. It commands before you move. It protects not with force but with resonance. That is the final sign. You've become the frequency of command. And in that frequency, darkness does not argue. It retreats. Not because you banished it, but because it knows it never had permission to enter in the first place.